You're listening to Milwaukee Mafia, your podcast dose of Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. I'm Eric.
I'm Gavin.
Gavin, we're back with another episode. You got anything for us today, or taking the day off?
No, I got something. I got a Monster Sweet Black cold brew. So I was at the grocery store doing my grocery shopping, and I saw this shelf of clearance items. And at first I saw some mustard, and I was like, I need some mustard, so I grabbed some mustard. And then I saw they had some a variety of Monster coffee beverages. You know, they're super cheap, and they're not expired. They're just discontinued. To be clear, like they're not on the clearance shelf because they're expired. They're a product line that isn't made anymore. So the first one I grabbed was a Monster latte, I think, and I will tell you, I forced myself to drink it, and I still dumped it out halfway through.
That was that bad.
It was so bad. So today it's a Monster cold brew sweet black.
So we don't know how this is going to turn out.
Yeah,
for you.
This could be the nastiest thing I've ever drank, but that's what I've got today. But as far as the Mafia goes,
well, no. Before we go into the Mafia, take a drink.
Okay.
This is initial reactions. He doesn't look offended.
It's not good. Oh, yeah, the aftertaste is really bad, and it tastes kind of powdery. It's not good. No.
So do you feel like you got ripped off?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, they were super cheap, but still, oof.
All right.
Rough.
So there you go. Our senseless promotion of Monster drinks.
It's not a promotion. Monster's disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, okay. So about the Mafia stuff. So I'm gonna tell you something here. I've got all kinds of stuff on the website, all kinds of stuff in the books, right? And then I've got this ongoing running file where I just keep notes in that are not otherwise online. And I will tell you that file right now is at 320 pages.
Holy cow.
Yeah. And then from there, I've got the FBI files and stuff that I copy into that. And the FBI, I mean, I don't know how many pages of that there are, but tens of thousands of pages to be copied yet. So just to give you some idea of like how much stuff I'm like trying to turn into things. So for this episode, what I did is I picked out, this is called Balistrieri Tax Problems in 1960 and 61. And this is not the whole story, because the way that Frank Balistrieri's tax problems happened from this point on, it was like a 10-year period, because like every time they tried to get him, he would like sue them in the courts and he would appeal, and it went on. And there were some other wild things that happened along the way. So there's no good way to do a 10-year story in one episode. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to do the beginning. So this is not the entire thing. This is just the beginning of his fun fights with the IRS.
Okay, before you go into the story, I want to ask questions about your whole big long file thing you have going on there.
Yeah.
So you said that you have like over 10,000 pages of FBI files.
It could be 100,000. I don't know, but yeah, it's definitely over in the tens of thousands.
So are these files you've just not had the time to actually really go through?
Mostly, yeah. Like so when the FBI files show up, I pretty much immediately, no matter what I'm doing, I stop what I'm doing and I like skim through them. So it's not like I just put them in a pile and never look at them. So I know what came in. But then, yeah, after that initial skim, they kind of just sort of go there. And now what I've done is they show up as PDFs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've taken them and I've renamed them by year. So they're all in order. So for the benefit of this podcast, like I can take my notes in order now. There's no sense in me taking notes out of something from the 70s when we're in the 60s. Like that, I'll do it later. Mm-hmm. But I'd rather, focus on the things that are actually going to come up. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, the biggest thing I take from that is that you have 10,000, theoretically, thousands and thousands of pages of information to go through yet.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to learn about this, apparently.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's some files that, they've sat nearly 10 years without me doing anything with.
And now we're going into the Balistrieri tax problems.
Yeah.
Sounds like a really, really, really compelling episode for our listeners.
You would think that, but no, this is good.
Hey, I'm going to be honest, man. I love the idea of it, but I just think a lot of our listeners are going to be like, this is not death and mafia killing.
Well, they're wrong, because this one has some good stuff in it, but I will tell you, some of the twists and turns along the way are wild. It's not just, you owe back taxes. Like, no, there's some weird stuff that happens. So,
all right, well, take her away.
All right, so this is 1960, 1961. This comes to the public's attention around April 1960, and the newspaper actually runs an article on the back taxes that are owed by two of Frank's businesses, the Downtowner and the Hotel Roosevelt, and he owes excise taxes, and excise taxes are basically like the taxes that businesses pay on alcohol and tobacco. Mm-hmm. So the Downtowner owed $6,500 in back taxes, and the Hotel Roosevelt owed $4,700, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but then I did the adjustments. In 2023 dollars, in today's dollars, that's $67,000 in taxes for the Downtowner and $52,000 for the Hotel Roosevelt. So well over $100,000 in unpaid taxes.
Not making the IRS very happy.
No, not happy. So the alcohol and tobacco tax investigators stopped down at the Downtowner to check out the books, and no books were found. Tax law required, and I believe still does require, that businesses keep their records on hand at the business so people can see where the liquor was purchased from and how much and that sort of thing, in order to get an idea of what there was. But they didn't have any books on the premises, so they could not be looked at. Not keeping them on hand at that time was a possible misdemeanor or up to $10,000 in fines. So that's pretty serious just in itself, not having the books there. Now, the FBI was fairly certain that the books, the accounting books, were kept in the apartment of Balistrieri's girlfriend, a woman named Jenny Aliotto, who also happens to be the cousin of his wife.
Oh.
And she rented this apartment under the name Loretta Fisher. And they're like, okay, we're going to get in here and we're going to get these books. So what they did, they're like, okay, we don't have a warrant, but what we're going to do is we're going to ask the manager of the apartment if we can have a key.
And did this work?
Kind of. The manager said yes and gave them the master key to get into the apartment. But then when they went to do it, they found that the locks had been changed. So they couldn't get in. They also considered wiretapping the telephones to try to listen in on telephone calls. There were 2 telephones in the apartment, but they were not the original telephones. They were replaced with 2 very fancy telephones that were very hard to wiretap. I don't know what these are. One was called a 500 series, and the other was called a 302G. If anybody knows about 1960s telephones, great. I don't. Then Frank is served by the IRS, and they order him to bring his account books to their office. He shows up at the office, the IRS office, without the books. Through his attorney, he said he would not be turning over his books and he would not be making any statement. At this time, the IRS wasn't really sure what to do when somebody didn't actually turn up with the books, so they just let him go home.
I assume with a time to return with the books?
They strongly recommend he brings the books, yeah. In the meantime, we have Steve DeSalvo, Frank's right-hand man, making a telephone call from his residence to the residence of a man named Nick DeMark in Racine. And Nick DeMark had been an IRS agent since 1938, so that's over 20 years at this point. Now, we don't know what happened on that phone call, and in fact, Nick DeMark never comes up in the story again. So this might have just been like a one-off where he called him and nobody answered or got nothing out of this. But why was he calling this guy? We don't know. So I did try to figure out if Nick DeMark had any connections to anybody. And I went out of my way on this. I did this massive genealogy project on this guy to try to see if he's related to anybody. And he's got some cousins who are some low-level mob guys, but that's pretty normal. I mean, if you're... Nick DeMark is Italian, and so if you're Italian, sooner or later you're going to find a cousin who's a guy. That's not unusual. But what was interesting, and this has nothing to do with anything, but what was interesting is that there's this thing in Italian genealogy, this is going to be a big fancy word here, called consanguinity.
Ooh. And
consanguinity is that people of Italian descent, more so in Italy than here, have a long history of marrying their cousins. And this is totally the case in Nick DeMark's situation. Nick DeMark married his cousin, okay?
Mm-hmm.
His wife's parents were cousins with each other, and his wife's grandparents were cousins with each other.
Okay.
So he was not only a cousin to his wife, but he was related to her in 3 different ways. So that's neither here nor there. There's nothing to do with this story.
But that was perfectly normal back then.
Yeah.
No. I mean, that was pretty much the standard way of doing things.
Yeah, no, it's nothing. There's nothing really weird about that. But that's just, it's something that traditionally Italians did. Mm-hmm. It's very common that even once they came to the United States, that they would more often than not marry somebody who was a third cousin or came from the same small town in Italy. So that's not weird. It's just it's funny when you're doing that and you see the same names pop up, because that's not nearly as common in other families, but it's nothing weird. Mm-hmm. It's just how it is.
I just guess I would have thought that, because what year are we talking about? Is this a...
Well, this is the 60s. He probably got married in the 30s.
So, okay. Yeah, I could see that still being around, because when they first really started settling in late 1800s, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can kind of see, I would think all communities that are first coming to the U.S., they probably did something like that, because they're not going to have a ton of their people in an area.
To a point.
So they're going to...
The Italians do it more, but yeah, it happens. It happens. Frank Balistrieri returns to the IRS office with his attorney, and this time he brings some of his accounting books. He says he could not bring all of the books because some of them were burned up in a garage fire, and then he tells them about this garage fire. The next day, the IRS looks into the garage fire and finds no evidence
that there was ever a garage
that this fire happened. So at this point, they're like, maybe we should try to get him on the record and get him for perjury, if nothing else, because there's no record of this fire. In the meantime, Frank's brother, Peter, is also going through tax problems because Peter is the one whose name is on a lot of these businesses because Frank has trouble getting his name on businesses. Not so much at this point for any record because he hasn't served jail time yet, but more so because Milwaukee's got this rule that you can only have your name on 2 liquor licensed businesses. I don't know if that's changed or not, but at this point that was the rule. So because he wanted to have several bars and nightclubs, his brother signed on to a number of them. So anyway, Peter Balistrieri's account books have been taken by the IRS, and they take them directly from his accountant. They didn't bother to even go through him. They take it from his accountant. He files a motion with the courts to say, hey, can I have my books back? Because he's scheduled to make an appearance and be asked questions about his taxes. And he's like, I can't even answer those without my books. And they're like, no, you cannot have them. Which seems kind of weird to me, but I mean, whatever. That's what they decided. The IRS intelligence unit agent spoke with the Milwaukee FBI and told them that his superior said that he could have access to all the FBI's surveillance records on Frank Balistrieri. The Milwaukee FBI agents told the IRS agent that they had been informed also to turn over anything of significance to the IRS, and they would provide full cooperation. Then, the internal FBI report, which was not given to the IRS agent, said that they believed that there was nothing of significance to the IRS in their surveillance, and they would not be turning over anything to the IRS. To translate that, the IRS agent was told by his boss that he could have access to FBI reports to help in his investigation. The FBI agent said, yes, we know about this, and you can have access to it. Internally, the FBI turns around and says, we ain't giving this guy anything.
Way to work together, government.
Yeah. So, all right. Okay, by October 1961, so now it's been over a year where they've been trying to get, information on these tax records, and they're still not getting very far. The FBI suspects that there were as many as 4 possible ways that the IRS was getting leaks of information out to Frank Balistrieri about ongoing tax matters. They also recognized that if they investigated Frank Balistrieri and then handed their findings over to the IRS, as they said that they would, that investigation could also be leaked, because once the IRS had it, if the IRS had leaks, then the FBI would also have leaks because it'd be leaking through the IRS. I don't know if they realized this till after the earlier, not cooperating part, but by this point, they're like, well, now we're definitely not handing anything over. Special agents John Holtzman and Albert Neckram were at Gallagher's Steakhouse, which is one of the Balistrieri restaurants, and they witnessed Frank Balistrieri come in around 9:30 p.m. He immediately pulled out a chair and set it by a table with 2 middle-aged men, a middle-aged woman, and a younger woman, none of whom were identified by the agents. He talked with them for a while, and then went and talked to a waitress, and then finally busied himself around the restaurant for 25 minutes. He conversed with the table a little bit more, and then went to go answer a telephone call. 15 minutes later, they were joined by yet another middle-aged man. From about 11 to 11:30, Balistrieri spoke with one of the men while the others had left the table. At 1:30 a.m., everyone left except Balistrieri. They departed in 3 cars. These people were somehow connected to Frank's tax problems, and ultimately the FBI was able to realize that one of the men at the table was an IRS agent. Unfortunately for me, the name is redacted in the record, so I don't know who this is. They confront the IRS agent, and he says, well, I have mutual friends with Frank Balistrieri, so that's how we know each other. Multiple times, he admits that Balistrieri did ask him multiple times about how his tax case was going and things like that, But each time the agent would only say, I'm not going to tell you. This is how cases normally go, how we normally do things, but I can't give you specifics. That's what he said. I would love to know the name of this agent. Now, I don't think it's Nick DeMark, because Nick DeMark's name was not redacted in other parts of the record. It would be really weird for them to redact it here.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's him. Now, it could be Provenzano. I think his name was Frank. Could be confused. Could be Angelo. It's Provenzano, who we talked about a long time ago.
I recognize that name. So.
Who happened to be gay, and there was talk that both the IRS and the Mafia were kind of using him against each other by sort of like blackmailing him. He's a possible candidate for who's blanked out here, because I could see him having mutual friends with Balistrieri.
Mm-hmm.
Also around this time, they investigated a bribery charge of Frank Balistrieri bribing a guy named John Engler. So I'm curious if maybe John Engler is a guy who's an IRS guy, but I couldn't confirm that, because looking into it, John Engler is a strangely super common name. Like there was a guy in Waukesha who was a politician named John Engler. There was actually a governor of Michigan named John Engler. I mean, obviously it's not that guy, but I'm like...
But the politician from Waukesha seems reasonable.
That's possible.
Yeah.
That's possible. So I'm like, I don't know. So we don't know exactly who it is, but the agent denies giving out any information, so, nothing happens there. The final thing in our story for today is that by the end of 1961, so now it's been over a year and a half, it's coming up on 2 years of the IRS and FBI working on his accounting book irregularities. The Milwaukee FBI office had still failed to access Jenny Aliotta's apartment after all this time. They decided, you know what might work? They're like, how about this? We get him indicted on something really small and stupid, like perjury. And then when we go to arrest him, we make sure we arrest him while he's visiting the apartment.
So then we can get in the apartment. Yeah.
So we'll knock on the door with the warrant and we'll arrest him. While the agents are arresting him, we can look around the room and maybe we'll see something. And if we see something, we can request a search warrant to come back and search the apartment.
Okay.
So that's their next plan.
I mean... it might work, but it's like, that's the best you can come up with, I guess, No,
it's a pretty good plan. But like they're not trying that hard. Like they're really dragging this out. And like we'll see in the future, like other things that they do, and they do some, it gets shady. It gets really shady what they do. Like at first, they're going to end up renting the apartment across the hall and just like kind of like looking through the peephole all day. Like that's relatively minor, but like they're going to keep stepping it up and crossing into the territory where they're blatantly breaking the law, trying to get into this apartment.
Is that it for it?
Yeah, that's it for now.
So,
like I said, like there's not really a great end because this is going to continue. Like, spoiler, he ends up going to prison for tax problems, but that's not till 1971.
Yeah, so we got a long ways of this being dragged out.
Yeah,
so
we're just going to check in every so often on how this goes.
So the thing that's crazy about this one to me is that, I don't know. I guess I would have tooled up that the mafia was resourceful and smart about the crimes they were committing. And it just sounds like, I mean, his strategy when he initially gets indicted for tax fraud is to just show up to the appointment without his books.
I don't think he's even indicted yet. I think at this point they're just kind of looking into it.
Yeah, like I just feel like on the back end the mafia would have had like books created to make this look legitimate.
Yeah.
But it seems like they didn't even bother. They just flatly ignored the fact that they were supposed to be paying taxes and just did not care.
That's definitely the way it seems. Yeah.
Which, I mean, and maybe that's just this time. That's all they had to do because it's still without even really having any books, it still takes them like 20 years to convict the guy or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, is it stupid to not even make an attempt to cover your tracks? Yeah, incredibly. But I'm going to give Frank credit here because what Frank is really good at is having attorneys. He's really good at always having attorneys, and that can get you a long way. If you got a good attorney, that can get you a long way.
Right, but if you have a good attorney and a dirty accountant working together to hide all this stuff, it's going to get you twice as far.
Probably, yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I'm just shocked that he never went that route. Or at least at this point, it doesn't seem like he's even bothering with that. You know, and it also swings back to like the previous, I think it was the last episode we recorded, where we were talking about all these manufacturing companies that were bringing up and making these counterfeit toys. Well, they kind of tried to cover themselves, but it was really like a half effort to really hide the fact what they were doing. They were doing the minimum to be able to counterfeit a toy, which they could have gone a few more steps and made it a lot harder to realize what they were doing.
True.
And
and I should clarify for this episode, like this is coming out of FBI files. It's not coming out of the IRS files because the IRS does not give you files. Yeah, the IRS is good luck getting anything. They have Freedom of Information Act forms that you can fill out, but they're not going to give you anything.
They just disapprove them.
Yeah. I've never tried. Maybe you could get like a personnel file or something, but if it's anything related to anything about someone's taxes, they won't give it to you. So trying to get the IRS's side of this story, like I don't have it. So unless it was in the newspaper or it made it into the FBI file, I don't have that side. But
yeah, and when you look at it from that perspective, maybe the level of sophistication they were doing this at was a lot more. But the FBI just kind of glosses over that, where the IRS would understand more everything they were doing to cover up what they weren't doing that they should be doing to be legal, I guess.
Right, because, from the FBI's perspective, like, what they want to do is they want to nail him for something. Mm-hmm. And they know that one way to do that is to get him busted for these tax issues. But they have no enforcement of that. The FBI doesn't really care about, the accounting. Like, that's
and
not
they
their
don't
business.
They don't understand it either, so they can't really understand how sophisticated it is.
Right. So to their extent, it's like, well, how do we catch him doing something shady? And at that point, they'd have to turn it over anyway. Mm-hmm. So, like, they're not, like, actively, like, show us your books. Like, the FBI doesn't care about that part.
Right.
But yeah, it is weird. But like I said, I got to give him some credit for the attorney thing. Like, at first, it sounds really dumb to show up. Like, when you're summoned to the IRS office and you show up and you have nothing, like, that seems really stupid. But it might not actually be that stupid because
they couldn't do it. They didn't know what to do when you brought nothing. So
I mean, like, the IRS is a scary thing, Like, as far as law enforcement goes, IRS is one of the scarier ones, I think. But really, like, they're the same as anyone else. Like, they have to prove that you did something wrong, and if the books don't exist, then it's on them. They got to find the evidence. So it sounds really dumb, but like, that's not the worst.
Yeah, I suppose.
The less you turn over to them, the harder they have to work.
I mean, it almost makes it sound like the worse your books are, the better you're off, because it's harder to prove you did anything wrong, right?
Yeah.
So, Interesting.
I mean, I'm not encouraging people.
Don't cook your books or not have books because of.
Yeah, I mean, just do your taxes correctly. But seriously, like back in this time, like now, I assume that there's a major difference between the IRS in the 60s and today. Like today, the IRS knows what you owe. Like before you file, they know exactly what you owe.
Or they have a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah, but like in the 60s, I have no idea like what they knew or didn't know. And these are all like restaurants and nightclubs, so it's like a largely cash business.
Yeah.
So they're not getting the numbers.
And you got to wonder, like, W-2s, did something like that even exist in the 60s? I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. I would bet the W-2s existed, but how good were they about, automatically sending them in each year? Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Like, they existed, but they maybe only received 60% of them and just didn't really do anything about the other 40% they never got and stuff like that.
I mean, by no means do I know a whole lot about how taxes work, but yeah, so this is it dumb? It's super dumb. But at the same time, like, it's going to work for a while.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, to us, to me on the surface, it's like there's so much more you could do. But I can't really take it away from him because he dragged it out for 10, 20 years, this case, before he ever gotten in any trouble for it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and he almost majorly wins on a technicality, but I'm not even going to mention what that technicality is because that's going to be a whole thing in itself. So
well, that's coming. That's coming in the future.
That's coming, and it's huge. it's like the most major legal violation that the FBI, IRS were doing. They should have gotten a lot more trouble.
All right. So I guess we can wrap this episode up. Just know this is kind of the first part of a many part.
Yeah,
but it's not. We're not following this up right after.
No.
We're just going to come back and revisit it along the timeline.
We'll check in periodically. I'd say that there's going to be at least 3 parts to this.
Cool. So, all right. With that, if you enjoy this podcast, please leave a review on your favorite podcast player. And we do have a Patreon. You can find that at MilwaukeeMafia.com, or you can visit patreon.com/MilwaukeeMafia. And we do have a newsletter, which can be easily signed up for from your show notes or at MilwaukeeMafia.com. And Gavin, do you have some contact information that they can reach out to you at?
I do. I've got MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com. Really getting every Milwaukee Mafia reference we can in there. And yeah, the newsletter, please sign up for the newsletter. It's super easy if you go to MilwaukeeMafia.com. It's not hidden. You'll see how to sign up like immediately, and you'll see, as far as we know, what episodes are coming up when we know, or places I might show up in real life. If you want to come and harass me in person, you're welcome to do that, and just other odds and ends. So don't spam me. It comes out like the first week of each month, and then that's it. Like we're not soliciting or anything. So, but it's low-key, laid back as a newsletter gets.
Yep. So, with that, we thank you everybody again, and we'll be back next week with the Patreon, and in 2 weeks with a regular Mafia episode. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. Join us next time for another look back at Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.